Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Michelle Fondin author vlog. I don't even know which episode this is, but that's okay because I will post it on the thumbnail. I'm going to talk to you today about what yoga asana has taught me about my life. So if you are interested, please do stay tuned. I'm the author of 12 published books, including the latest and the greatest, The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times, a practical guide to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This book is available on Amazon and on Ingram Spark. If you are new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for being here. Please do subscribe to the channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications, and thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I am here with my Grogu tumbler, and guess what? If you've been following my vlog videos, I found Grogu, because I'm usually here with Gautama and Grogu. And for the past several months, I haven't been able to find Grogu because my cat Mocha, who is currently under my chair and trying to catch my feet, she has a habit of taking all the stuffed animals in the house, no matter where they are, and hiding them. And so I just discovered one of her hiding places, and that's how I found Grogu. Go figure, so crazy. She's always moving stuff around. All right, let's talk about yoga asana, which is basically yoga to most people, right? But I'm talking about the 8 limbs of yoga from my book, where yoga asana is only one part. And if you haven't viewed that video, I will post that link right here that you can view after this video. So I'm gonna get really comfortable, take a sip of my Ticino Dandelion Caramel Nut Tea. Still the best herbal tea I have ever tasted in my entire life. Truly, this is the best tasting tea I've ever tasted. Okay, so yes, Ticino, if you want to give me a sponsorship, please do. All right, let's talk about yoga. So I'm going to get really personal and really vulnerable here because a lot of you don't even know about my history of how I started yoga, what I was doing before then, and I'm truly gonna really reveal to you what yoga asana has taught me about my personal life. Now, I know everybody is totally different, but since this is the Michelle Fondin author vlog, this is about my story into practicing yoga. So I'm gonna go before that because I started practicing yoga when I was 18. I took my first yoga class when I was 18. I had just graduated from high school. Like a week before. And I took my first yoga class with my high school religion teacher. Yes, religion teacher. She was actually very progressive. She flew planes. She did like aeronautics. She was 4'11". She taught yoga and meditation. And actually, I first learned about guided meditation when I was about 16. And I was in her class called Conscious Immorality. And she would take us 16-year-olds into the chapel, and we had a school chapel. I went to a Catholic school, and she took us into the chapel, and we would move all of the chairs. I think they were kind of like pew-like chairs. We would move them, and we would lie on the floor, yes, the whole class, in Shavasana, which I didn't know what Shavasana was. It's basically relaxation pose. And she would take us through these beautiful guided meditations. And that was truly my first exposure into guided meditations. And I was dating someone at the time who was 8 years my senior. He knew her. Her name is Leanne. I talk about her a lot in this book. I also talk about her when I'm teaching meditation, and I talk about her, I believe, in one other of my books. She was a major influence in my life. When my boyfriend at the time told me that Leanne was teaching this summer class, this summer yoga class, I wanted to take it mostly because he was taking it. And so it wasn't so much that I wanted to learn yoga. It was more that I wanted to be with him, and anything that he asked me to do, I would do because I wanted to be with him. So he said, let's take this yoga class together. He had never taken a yoga class. He had done other things, like he had done meditation, Zen Buddhist meditation and things like that, but he hadn't actually taken yoga. And in fact, back then, this was 89, yoga was not super popular. It really wasn't popular, but that was actually to my benefit. It was to my benefit that at the time, yoga was not popular. And I'm going to explain why. And that is how yoga really transformed my life. Because before that yoga class, I was in the world of classical ballet. And I loved ballet. I wanted to become a ballerina. By the time I was 12 years old, I was taking ballet 5 nights a week. And my ballet studio was not your traditional run-of-the-mill ballet studio. My ballet master was feeding students directly into the New York City Ballet and the American Ballet Theater. Now, even though I desperately wanted to become a ballerina, I didn't have the body for it. In other words, I had the long and slender body to perform ballet and do it well. I just didn't have the feet for it. You need very high arches. You need feet that are going to be perfect in point shoes. And my feet are nearly flat. So I just didn't have those feet, unfortunately. I also didn't have this self-confidence to be able to audition for the big ballet companies, but ballet still was very much in my heart and a part of my life for many years after I quit in high school. My background was in ballet, and then I taught group fitness classes like aerobics. So transitioning to practicing yoga asana was not a huge jump for me because it was similar in movement for me to ballet. But the difference was ballet was always a competitive sport. Ballet was always about precision, getting better, getting stronger, and outperforming the kids in your class. Because if you wanted to become a professional ballerina, you really had to do better than pretty much anyone else in your class, which I never made it that far. There were ballerinas that were far exceeding in ability who had natural God-given talent that I didn't have, and I had to work really hard for the talent that I did acquire. But yoga felt different to me in that first class. That first class in 1989, in the summer of 1989, when I was 18 years old, with Leanne in that community center, for those 90 minutes, it felt completely different. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. For the first time in my life, I felt connected to myself. And I couldn't quite articulate it at the time. I couldn't articulate the feeling or even understand the feeling or what yoga brought to me. But I knew it had changed and transformed my life. Now, I mentioned that yoga was not popular in 1989. Nobody really knew about yoga. I think it had a rebirth like in the 60s, but then it kind of went dormant in the 70s and early 80s. So really, there weren't a lot of people practicing yoga. It was really hard to find a yoga class anywhere in the United States, especially in Michigan, where I lived. But I say that was to my benefit because my teacher, Leanne, had studied in India. She had studied with Indian gurus. And so the methodology that she taught, the way she taught was very pure. It was hatha yoga with a meditative penchant to it. And that was the way that I personally learned. And for me, learning yoga in that way and not having any other methods to learn was what I needed for my life, because aerobics was kind of competitive. I was in it for the weight loss. I was in it to stay slender, thin, and to get better and better. And group fitness in general is a little bit about that gym attitude and competition. Ballet was about competition and getting better. Yoga for me was about rest, relaxation, and reconnecting to myself. And that is the way I learned yoga. That is the way I practiced yoga. And for me, it was a godsend. Now, of course, when I went to college, I wasn't practicing yoga. I didn't really even have the means or the ways to practice yoga because yoga wasn't even offered. And I then moved to France. And in the same way, I was teaching aerobics. I was teaching step aerobics, high impact aerobics. So yoga was not even on my radar. I didn't even know that you could teach yoga. I didn't know that because nobody was doing yoga in gyms and fitness centers. But fast forward to having teachers come into my life in my mid-20s, and I was continuing my yoga practice. It was still in the very pure way of that hatha yoga practice that I first learned when I was 18. And each time I went back to yoga for any purpose, it could have been for me to reduce anxiety, which it usually was. I was pretty anxious all the time. And whether it was for my pregnancies, which I practiced prenatal yoga, I constantly went back to reconnect with myself. And I thought of a quote when I was in the shower today about what yoga has truly taught me about my life. What yoga provides for me when I'm sitting in a hatha yoga class, when I'm doing poses like yin yoga poses where you have to hold the pose for 5 to 10 minutes, when I'm doing any type of meditative yoga practice, yoga allows me to hear the whispers that are going on the inside of me that I normally wouldn't hear in daily life. So your body, your mind, your soul, your spirit, your inner self is constantly whispering to you and asking you to reconnect with who you are. But in our daily living, we don't often hear those whispers. We don't even pay attention to those whispers. Now, you can certainly hear them in meditation. And for me, that is absolutely one way in which I hear those whispers. But not everybody meditates. And if you know my story, you know that I didn't learn to meditate until 2007. I had a few initiations into meditation prior to that, but they were all guided meditations. So it really wasn't until 2007 that I was practicing a silent meditation practice, which I practice today. So think about that. Between 1989 and 2007, I was practicing yoga asana, not consistently, off and on, especially in my early 20s. But here's the thing. Every time I went back to my yoga asana practice, I was able to hear the whispers of myself louder and louder. The whispers I normally wouldn't perceive about myself in my daily life. Like I said, because I had experienced so much anxiety, I grew up in a very anxious environment. I was married to a very anxious man. So for yoga to transform me was an amazing feat with all the anxiety I was living with. Every time I would sit on my yoga mat, I was able to reconnect with myself, and I still do. But now that I have the meditation practice, it's a little bit of both. So it's meditating to hear my inner voice, but yoga asana practice is also to hear my inner voice. And that's why I say, like, it's so unfortunate. And I feel bad for the people that are practicing yoga today that are practicing in gyms or practicing for a sport, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel like just the way ballet was for me, because if you look at ballet from an observer standpoint, if you look at it, it seems almost yogesque in nature. It seems graceful and beautiful and flowing and meditative. But ballet, classical ballet, is one of the hardest things you could ever practice. And it only comes from hours upon hours upon hours of daily practice and daily discipline. So no, ballet, classical ballet, did not provide for me that inner peacefulness that yoga does, because ballet was always about technique, precision, and getting better and better and stronger and stronger. Whereas yoga, from the purest standpoint of practicing yoga on the mat, when you're in a hatha practice, when you're in a Raja yoga practice, a yin yoga practice, or any type of meditative practice, it's taking you inside and it's allowing you to, for that hour, for that 90 minutes, to reconnect with yourself. Because daily living is constantly causing you to disconnect. And so when I say I feel sorry for the people that are taking yoga in a gym or taking yoga in a hot yoga studio or taking yoga in a power yoga studio, it's because it just becomes another sport. It just becomes another way to be hard on your body, to kill the body, to lose that weight, to have, no pain, no gain. It's not what I had experienced and continued to experience when yoga was not popular. When yoga was not popular, and there was one option, really. It was like hatha yoga, that's pretty much it. That was the only option. There was kundalini yoga that I had heard of, but it really wasn't widespread in the United States until much later. So really, if you were exposed to yoga in the 80s and 90s, for the most part, you were being exposed to pretty traditional yoga from India. It was pretty much like you have hatha yoga, and that's pretty much the only practice anybody was practicing. Iyengar, yes, that was super popular, but Iyengar is very meditative. So if you are in that precision-based practice, you're still holding the poses and breathing, learning the breathing techniques. And so you're still in that inner space. Whereas a lot of the practices today are more like an aerobics class. They're more like a high impact class, or they're more like rush. We've got the next thing to do class. And so for me, throughout the decades, really, it's been decades at this point, which is so crazy to think about. I was thinking like it's been almost 4 decades, but it really hasn't. Like maybe 3.5 decades, maybe 3.5 decades. Yeah, that sounds about right. I've been practicing yoga for 3.5 decades, but for those 3.5 decades, it's kind of cool to look back and see the time periods of my life where I would in earnest get back on the mat. Now, of course, some of you know I ran a yoga studio for 10 years, so I was consistently on the mat for those 10 years teaching, and I really craved to become a student again. But I taught the way I learned, so everything was meditative. But when I really think about it, what yoga really taught me each and every time was that as soon as you get back on the mat, you're reconnecting with yourself, and whatever anxieties, whatever problems, whatever depression, whatever issues you have with your relationships or money or anything in your life, it's going to be resolved on the mat. And that is like the most precious gift I could have ever received. And I was so fortunate to have it happen when I was 18 years old. I mean, how fortunate is that? Now, I believe that there are no mistakes in the world whatsoever. There are no mistakes. And the fact that Leanne came into my life, the fact that this guy Chris came into my life, the fact that they were both catalysts in me taking that first yoga class when I was 18, that was no mistake. I was meant to be there, obviously. But I still feel so grateful and so appreciative that I was given that gift of having my first yoga asana practice when I was 18 and being able to have that, what I call, I guess, is mat touch. Like when I touch the mat and when I'm sitting on the mat, I know I'm able to reconnect with myself. Having that anchor, that solid ground, the solid foundation and the stability of knowing that, and knowing that as soon as I sit, I'm reconnecting with who I am. There's nothing like it for me. Meditation, certainly. But since everything in my life has been movement-based, I'm now a runner and I lift weights and I do yoga, but running can give you that to a degree, but running is still about powering through the moves, because everyone knows runners get that runner's block, especially I'm a distance runner. So runners get that runner's block. So it is a mental activity still, but yoga truly allows you, in the purest form of the practice, allows you to release, let go, and reconnect with yourself. And I love that aspect of it. And I feel like it's such a precious gift. Everybody who knows me in my house, I have yoga mats in every single room in my house, literally. I have yoga mats in every room in my house, and I will stop, drop, and do yoga anywhere. I'm like staring at my basket of yoga mats. So yeah, I mean, yoga is so integrated with who I am in every moment of my life. And it has always been. I don't count the first 17 years of my life. It has always been with me, and I consider that to be such a precious gift. So thank you for listening to my rant on how yoga has completely changed and transformed my life. And if you haven't yet heard the whispers of your inner self call to you on the mat to reconnect you with yourself, I would encourage you to try hatha yoga. And one of my favorite channels, actually, he doesn't teach hatha. He teaches kind of like hatha, but he's mostly Kundalini yoga, is Akhanda Yoga, Akhanda yoga on YouTube. He's out of India. He has an ashram. He is incredible. And I always mispronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But he's amazing, and probably one of the closest to my teachers of the past as well. So I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you for subscribing. Please do pick up a copy of The 8 Limbs of Yoga for Modern Times. Pick this book up for your yoga studio, your yoga teachers, your yoga teacher training programs, anybody who you know who does yoga. This is so helpful for yoga for modern living. I want to thank you so much for your support of my channel and sharing and subscribing, and I will see you guys real soon.